Elizabeth Holmes raised $900 million with a single promise. One drop of blood, 200 tests, no needles, no hospitals, no long waits for results. Investors signed checks by the millions, certain they were funding the future of medicine. The machine never worked the way she claimed. Thousands of patients received results that were dangerously wrong. Welcome to Deal English, where real business stories teach you the English that matters in the real world. In 2003, a 19-year-old Stanford sophomore dropped out to build that machine. She called her company Theranos, blending the words therapy and diagnosis. Holmes had no medical degree. She had a notebook full of ideas and a relentless certainty. She pitched professors, family friends, and early backers on one vision: tiny blood tests that could replace needles and labs. To build it, she needed money from people willing to bet on an unproven idea. Business calls that money venture capital, funding given to early, unproven companies in exchange for ownership. The first checks arrived within months. By 2004, Theranos had raised over $6 million. In 2010, Theranos quietly signed a pilot deal with the supermarket chain Safeway, worth tens of millions of dollars. Safeway built clinics inside its stores, expecting Theranos technology to draw customers in for cheap, convenient testing. The machines kept failing internal accuracy checks. Results were delayed for months, then years. By 2015, Safeway walked away from the partnership entirely. It had spent over $350 million. Not one public testing clinic ever opened. As funding grew, Holmes built a board unlike any other startups. Former secretaries of state, retired generals, a former U.S. senator. People with power, connections, and reputations. The very stakeholders whose support could open doors. Anyone with a financial or personal interest in the company's success. Few of them had any background in medicine or laboratory science. Their job, in theory, was to protect the company and its investors. That responsibility has a name: fiduciary duty, the legal obligation to act in the best interest of shareholders. On this board, almost no one was positioned to question the science. Investors lined up. Some wrote checks after a single meeting, without ever seeing the technology tested independently. Normally, serious investment requires careful research into a company's claims, finances, and technology. That process is called due diligence, checking the facts before committing the money. At Theranos, that step was treated as an inconvenience, not a requirement. Holmes discouraged outside testing. She personally controlled every demonstration. By 2010, the company had raised hundreds of millions of dollars. Almost no one outside Theranos had verified the product worked. The device was called Edison, after the famous inventor. In demonstrations, a Theranos employee would prick a visitor's finger and draw a single drop of blood. What investors didn't see was what happened next. Many of those samples were never tested by the machine on stage. Employees secretly carried them to a back room and ran them on standard lab equipment from other manufacturers. The company never delivered a working proof of concept, a working model that proves an idea is technically achievable. Without that, every dollar raised rested on belief, not evidence. Theranos promised 200 different tests. The Food and Drug Administration only ever cleared one, a test for the herpes virus. Holmes cultivated an image as carefully as she built her company. She wore black turtlenecks, lowered the pitch of her voice, and rarely blinked during interviews. Journalists noticed the resemblance to Steve Jobs and wrote about it constantly. Fortune and Forbes put her on their covers, calling her the youngest self-made female billionaire in the world. The image became a kind of currency. The more convincing Holmes appeared, the less anyone felt the need to ask for proof. Inside Theranos, secrecy was enforced like a security clause in wartime. Every employee, vendor, and visitor signed strict legal paperwork before seeing anything. Among them was a non-disclosure agreement, a contract preventing employees from sharing internal company information. Engineers who raised concerns about accuracy were reassigned or quietly dismissed. Lab technicians who questioned the results were told the science was proprietary, too sensitive to explain. The pressure to stay silent was constant. Inside the labs, almost everyone sensed something was wrong, yet almost no one spoke. In Arizona, Theranos pushed for a new state law. It let customers order their own blood tests without a doctor's authorization, known as a wellness exemption. It expanded the company's reach dramatically, putting testing kiosks inside dozens of Walgreens pharmacies. More customers meant more samples, more revenue, and more pressure on machines that still didn't work reliably. Convenience expanded faster than competence ever did. Nobody outside the company was checking whether the expansion was safe. By 2013, real patients were being tested. A woman was told she might be having a miscarriage based on a Theranos result. She wasn't. A man's potassium levels came back so abnormal the lab would have predicted a heart attack. His heart was fine. These were not rare errors. Internal data later showed dangerously inaccurate results across multiple categories of tests. People made medical decisions, sometimes life-changing ones, based on numbers the company knew were unreliable. In September 2013, Theranos partnered with Walgreens to bring blood testing into ordinary pharmacies across America. The announcement made Holmes a national celebrity overnight. Investors who had taken an equity stake, a percentage of ownership in the company, watched their paper fortunes climb fast. By 2014, Theranos was valued at $9 billion. Holmes personally was worth an estimated $4.5 billion, at least on paper. None of it was backed by a working product. The investor list read like a roster of America's wealthiest families. Media mogul Rupert Murdoch put in $125 million. The Walton family, of Walmart fame, invested heavily alongside him. The DeVos family committed another $100 million. Almost none of them had a background in medicine, diagnostics, or laboratory science. They were betting on Holmes, not on peer-reviewed proof. Not everyone was convinced. A pathologist named Adam Clapper read the glowing press coverage and noticed something missing. Published scientific data. He wrote about his doubts on a small medical blog. That post reached a journalist at the Wall Street Journal. His name was John Carreyrou. Carreyrou had spent years investigating corporate fraud. Something about Theranos' silence, despite its size, told him the story was bigger than one skeptical blog post. Carreyrou began calling former employees, one by one. Most refused to talk, bound by the non-disclosure agreements they had signed on their way out the door. A handful agreed anyway, frightened but unwilling to stay silent any longer. Over months, Carreyrou built a careful record, failed proficiency tests, diluted samples, falsified quality logs. He corroborated every claim with at least one additional source before writing a single sentence. Patience, not speed, became his entire strategy. Former employees described a culture defined by constant turnover and fear. Some staff lasted only a few months before resigning or being dismissed. Engineers who pushed back too hard on flawed data often found themselves removed from projects entirely. The company's internal slogan urged employees to think differently and never accept limits. That language was borrowed directly from the era's biggest technology giants. One source stood out: Tyler Schultz, a young Theranos employee and the grandson of board member George Schultz. Tyler had grown alarmed by failed quality tests and falsified records. He raised the concerns internally and was ignored. Eventually, he reached out to regulators and quietly to Carreyrou himself. It split his family in two. His grandfather, a powerful stakeholder in the company's defense, believed Holmes completely. Tyler believed the patients mattered more than family loyalty, even if it cost him the relationship. Years later, after the company collapsed entirely, grandfather and grandson eventually reconciled, though the relationship never fully recovered. When Theranos learned about the investigation, it fought back hard. The company's lawyers sent a formal legal warning to the Wall Street Journal, demanding the story be dropped. It was a cease and desist letter, a legal order to stop an activity or face consequences. They threatened former employees who had spoken to Carreyrou, citing the confidentiality agreements they had signed. Tyler Schultz was personally confronted by Theranos lawyers and by his own grandfather. The pressure was designed to make every source back down before a single word reached print. On October 15, 2015, The Wall Street Journal published Carreyrou's first story. The headline question was simple: did Theranos' technology actually work? The article detailed failed tests, diluted samples, and employees too afraid to speak. Walgreens, regulators, and investors took notice within hours. Holmes appeared on television almost immediately, calling the story baseless and the work of a journalist with an agenda. Behind the confident denial, the company's carefully built reputation had already begun to crack. The article also exposed something else: a clear conflict of interest running through the boardroom. That's a situation where personal loyalty competes with professional judgment. Directors who should have protected investors had spent years defending Holmes instead. Few had ever demanded to see independent proof that the technology functioned. Their prestige had protected the company for over a decade. It could not protect it from a published, sourced, fact-checked story. Federal inspectors from the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services arrived at the California lab in 2016. Their report described conditions posing immediate jeopardy to patient health and safety. Regulators revoked the lab's operating license and banned Holmes from owning or running a testing laboratory for 2 years. It was one of the harshest penalties the agency had ever issued. That was a clear signal the failures went far beyond ordinary mistakes. Walgreens ended the partnership in 2016, shutting down every testing kiosk inside its stores. Theranos voided or corrected hundreds of thousands of blood test results. Many of those results had already shaped real medical decisions for real patients. The company's $9 billion valuation collapsed towards zero within 2 years. Investors and partners who had once raced to associate with Holmes now faced a different problem. It's called reputational risk, the danger that association with a scandal damages a person's or company's public image. By the time the company finally shut its labs in 2018, the numbers were staggering. More than 1 million blood test results had been voided or corrected in total. Some patients had been told they were healthy when they weren't. Others had been frightened by results that turned out to be entirely false. There was no public registry to notify every affected patient individually. Many never learned exactly how unreliable their results had been. The damage stretched across more than a dozen states, wherever Theranos testing centers had operated inside Walgreens stores. In 2018, the Securities and Exchange Commission charged Holmes and former President Sunny Balwani with massive fraud. Investigators said the company had deceived investors about its technology and finances for years. The charge carried a specific legal name: securities fraud, deceiving investors about a company to gain money or an advantage. Holmes settled the civil case without admitting guilt, paying a penalty, and giving up control of the company. A separate criminal case was only just beginning. Holmes stood trial on criminal charges in 2021. Prosecutors argued she had knowingly lied to investors and patients for years to keep the company alive. Her defense argued something different: that years of psychological and emotional abuse by Balwani had clouded her judgment and decisions. The jury heard both arguments for months before reaching its verdict. In January 2022, the jury convicted Holmes on 4 counts of wire fraud and conspiracy. It acquitted her on the charges related directly to patients. In November, a judge sentenced her to more than 11 years in prison. Balwani was convicted on similar charges and sentenced separately to nearly 13 years. Theranos itself had already dissolved in 2018 after raising and losing more than $900 million. Across its entire history, Theranos raised closer to $945 million from investors, banks, and partners combined. Almost all of it disappeared. Murdoch alone wrote off his full $125 million investment. He later sold his shares back to the company for $1, just to claim a tax loss. Looking back, almost everyone involved asked the same question: how did so many experienced people miss it for so long? Part of the answer is simple. Holmes was extraordinarily persuasive, and persuasion is not proof. Due diligence exists precisely because confidence can be faked far more easily than results. The investors who skipped it weren't unintelligent. They were impatient, dazzled by potential, and unwilling to ask the questions that might have slowed them down. Theranos became a cautionary tale taught in business schools and journalism classes alike. Documentaries and a television series later retold the story to millions of new viewers. It showed how a powerful board and a charismatic founder could combine forces, add a culture of secrecy, and the truth stayed hidden for over a decade. Silicon Valley often celebrates founders who fake confidence until their products catch up to their promises. Theranos showed exactly what happens when the product never catches up at all. A documentary called The Inventor carried the warning further. So did a television series called The Dropout. Patients were harmed. Careers were destroyed. $900 million vanished into a machine that never worked as promised. The story remains one of the clearest warnings in modern business. A compelling vision can raise money. Only real evidence can justify keeping it. The next time a pitch sounds too smooth, too confident, too good to question, that feeling is worth listening to. Let's review what this story taught us. Venture capital. Money invested in early, unproven companies in exchange for ownership. Stakeholder. Anyone with a financial or personal interest in a company's success. Fiduciary duty. A legal obligation to act in the best interest of shareholders. Due diligence. Careful research into a company's claims before investing money. Proof of concept. A working model that shows an idea can actually function. Non-disclosure agreement. A contract preventing someone from sharing internal information. Equity stake. A percentage of ownership held in a company. Cease and desist. A legal letter demanding someone stop an action immediately. Conflict of interest. A situation where personal loyalty competes with professional duty. Reputational risk. The danger that a scandal damages a person's or company's public image. Securities fraud. Deceiving investors about a company to gain money or an advantage. That's the story of Theranos. A $900 million warning about charisma without evidence. If you want the full, deeply reported account, John Carreyrou's book, Bad Blood, tells it best. You'll find the link in the description below. Subscribe for next week's story, and we'll see you then.